The Pacific Ocean. December 13th, 1974. It's past midnight. A man stands alone at the stern of a massive Soviet cruise liner, 14 meters above the churning black water. The ship's engines roar beneath his feet. The propeller, wide as a two-story building, thrashes the ocean into white foam directly below him. Around him, over 1,000 Soviet citizens eat, drink, dance, and celebrate their vacation, completely unaware of what is about to happen. The man reaches under his towel. He pulls out a bag. Inside, a snorkeling mask, a pair of fins, and a breathing tube. That's it. No compass, no food, no water, no radio, no life jacket, nothing else. He stares into the darkness. Somewhere out there, 18 kilometers away, though he doesn't know it yet, is a small island in the Philippines called Siargao. He's never been there. He has no boat, and he has no map. He has no guarantee the current won't pull him straight out into the open Pacific, where he'll simply disappear forever. He adjusts the mask over his face. He looks at the stars one last time. And then Stanislav Kurilov, Soviet oceanographer, yoga practitioner, and the man who had just found the single greatest loophole in the history of the Iron Curtain, steps off the railing and falls into the void. How in the world did it come to this? And how did one man, with nothing but a pair of rubber fins, outmaneuver the entire Soviet system? Let's go back, all the way to the beginning. 38 years before that night on the Pacific, Stanislav Vasilyevich Kurilov, Slava to his friends, was born in 1936 in the city of Vladikavkaz, in what is today southern Russia. His family moved to Semipalatinsk, a city in Soviet Kazakhstan, when he was still a child. And almost immediately, Slava developed what his relatives would later call an obsession. His first spoken word, according to people who knew him, wasn't mama, wasn't papa. It was Voda. Water. His mother, terrified of the rivers and lakes, forbade him from swimming. But the boy found his way to the water anyway. He snuck out. He practiced in secret. And when he was 10 years old, on a dare from older kids, he swam across the Irtysh River, a massive, fast-moving Siberian waterway that experienced adult swimmers treated with extreme respect. He was 10 years old. He swam across alone. But here's the twist. Growing up in Semipalatinsk in the 1940s and 50s wasn't just difficult. It was quietly catastrophic. Because Semipalatinsk sat right next to one of the most active nuclear weapons testing sites on Earth. The Soviet military detonated over 450 nuclear devices in the surrounding steppe during those years. The mushroom clouds were visible from the city. The radiation was invisible but constant. Kurilov would later write about watching the horizon light up, about the strange pride and the stranger fear of living under the shadow of his own government's weapons. It left a mark on him that never fully healed. Despite that, or maybe because of it, Slava became obsessed with the sea. Not the rivers, not the lakes. The ocean. He read everything about it. He dreamed about it. He decided early on that his life would be dedicated to exploring the deep water, to understanding the living world beneath the surface. He enrolled in oceanography, so he became a skilled diver, then a researcher, then an aquanaut, a scientist who actually lived inside underwater laboratories on the seafloor. He spent months at a depth of 14 meters inside a facility called Chernomor in the Black Sea, studying the ecosystem below. He worked with the Institute of Oceanology at the USSR Academy of Sciences. He was brilliant, he was respected, and he was completely trapped. Because in the Soviet Union, being good at your job didn't mean you got to do your job. The state decided where you went. The state decided who you worked with. And the state, specifically the KGB, and the Communist Party's vast bureaucratic machinery, decided whether you were ideologically clean enough to be trusted outside the country's borders. Slava Kurilov was not. The reasons were never made fully clear to him, but they likely included several factors. His sister had married an Indian citizen and moved to India, then to Canada, already suspicious in Soviet eyes. His father had been a prisoner of war during World War II, another black mark in a system that treated POWs as potential traitors. And during his military service, Kurilov had been exposed to classified information about chemical warfare, which made authorities even more reluctant to let him travel abroad. So when Jacques-Yves Cousteau, one of the most famous ocean explorers in human history, reached out to collaborate with Soviet scientists on joint expeditions to Tunisia and the Pacific, Kurilov was selected to participate. He spent a year preparing. He studied navigation. He learned about the southern constellations. He was ready. The permission was denied. He applied again. And denied. He applied a third time, this time to visit his own sister in Canada. Denied. The response was always the same. A visit to capitalist countries is not appropriate for you at this time. For a man who had devoted his entire life to the ocean, who had dreamed of exploring the world seas since he was a child, swimming in secret against his mother's wishes, this wasn't just a bureaucratic inconvenience. It was a slow suffocation. It was watching the world you love through glass you're not allowed to break. Slava Kurilov began to think about escape, but escaping the Soviet Union wasn't like leaving through a door. The USSR had 22,400 kilometers of land borders, most of them militarized. The sea borders were patrolled constantly, and every single Soviet citizen who traveled abroad had to apply for an international passport separately, a document that was not automatically granted. The KGB maintained files on millions of citizens. Informants were everywhere. The walls were real and they were lethal. Kurilov, however, was an oceanographer. He thought differently. He spent months studying the problem not as a fugitive, but as a scientist. He looked for systems. He looked for gaps. He looked for the one place where the Soviet machine had left a crack in the wall. And then, in November 1974, he found it. He was reading a newspaper when an advertisement caught his eye. A cruise ship, the Sovietsky Soyuz, the Soviet Union, was offering a 20-day voyage, advertised as from winter to summer. The ship would depart Vladivostok, sail south toward the equator, and return without stopping at a single foreign port. And because there were no foreign port calls, the trip required no international passport, no exit visa, no special ideological clearance, just a ticket. Pause. Think about that for a second. The Soviet system was so obsessed with controlling its citizens that it had created a loophole for cruises to nowhere, voyages that technically never touched foreign soil. You didn't need permission because you were never officially leaving the country. You were just floating above international waters and coming home. Kurilov had found his door. He bought a ticket immediately. He told no one his real plan. He began preparing, not packing suitcases, but training his body. He had always practiced yoga, but now he intensified it, working on breath control, pain tolerance, and mental endurance. He studied the exact route of the ship. He reviewed nautical charts of the Philippine Sea. He identified one specific moment, when the ship would pass closest to the island of Siargao, as the only viable window. He calculated distances, estimated currents, and mapped the constellations of the southern sky, which he would use for navigation since he couldn't bring a compass. He made himself a pair of custom-webbed gloves to use alongside his snorkeling fins. He packed these items into a bag, under a towel, knowing that if any crew member looked too closely, the whole plan was over. On December 8, 1974, the Sovietsky Soyuz left Vladivostok with over 1,000 passengers aboard. Kurilov was among them. And here's the part that nobody expected. If you've been finding this story as insane as it really is, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe. More stories like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. For 5 days at sea, Slava Kurilov performed the most nerve-wracking act of his life, acting completely normal. He went to the parties. He sat at meals. He watched the other passengers drink themselves into oblivion and dance and flirt and pretend they were on a vacation from everything serious. Meanwhile, Kurilov was calculating, watching, waiting. He spent hours at the railing, staring into the water, studying the ship's wake, feeling the currents. At night, he lay on deck and memorized the stars. He noted the exact shape of the stern and realized that the ship's design, which had an unusual barrel hull and massive hydrofoils below the waterline, made jumping from the sides essentially impossible. The hull curved outward. You'd smash into the metal on the way down. The only viable point was the stern, directly behind the propeller. That specific narrow gap between the hydrofoils and the churning blades was the one place where a human body, entering the water at exactly the right angle, might actually survive. One night, walking toward the captain's cabin past the bridge, Kurilov noticed the door was open. The room was empty. On the table, clearly visible, was a navigational map of the liner's route, with dates and precise coordinates. He studied it for as long as he dared. When he memorized what he needed, he walked away. He now knew exactly when and where to jump. December 13th, 1974. The ship is in the Philippine Sea. Siargao Island is approximately 18 kilometers away, though the currents, as he will soon discover, make that number completely meaningless. Sunset. The passengers are celebrating. Music pumps from the ballroom. Somewhere below, bottles are being opened. People are laughing. Kurilov walks calmly toward the stern. He's carrying a towel. He's wearing swim shorts. He looks like any other passenger who's decided to get some fresh air after dinner. He reaches the stern railing. He looks down at the propeller's wake. White foam in the darkness, churning, enormous, lethal. He looks at the stars. He identifies the constellation he needs to navigate by. He takes a breath. "I asked God for good luck," he would later write, and stepped into the unknown. He jumps, 14 meters of freefall. The impact hits him like a truck. Salt water explodes around him, and then silence. Black, cold, absolute silence beneath the surface. He fights his way up. He breaks the surface, and the first thing he sees is the enormous metal hull of the Sovietsky Soyuz passing directly next to him, the propeller still churning not 15 meters away. He is alive. Barely, but alive. He gets his fins on. He gets his mask on. He starts swimming. The lights of the ship recede into the darkness ahead of him. Then the lights stop. The ship has slowed. It's turning. The crew had noticed someone was missing. The Sovietsky Soyuz was coming back to search for him. Kurilov dove. He held his breath. He went underwater and he stayed there, invisible beneath the surface, while the massive ship swept its searchlights across the water above him. In the dark, in the freezing Pacific, while the lights swept overhead, he waited and waited. Eventually, the ship gave up. The lights disappeared into the distance, and what's coming next is going to be hard to believe. Night 1. Kurilov swims using the stars. He's oriented toward Siargao, 18 kilometers away. Except the currents, the powerful, invisible rivers that move beneath the surface of the Pacific, aren't cooperating. Every stroke forward is being partially undone by water, pushing him sideways, backward, parallel to the coast. What should take hours is taking much longer. His legs already ache from the fins. The water is warm, but the salt burns his eyes. He has no food. He has no fresh water. He does not stop. He had prepared for exactly this. The breathing exercises, the yoga, The mental training. He used techniques he had developed over years of practice to suppress pain signals, to focus on rhythm, to enter a state where the physical body becomes secondary to the act of will. One stroke, then another, then another. Guided by stars he had memorized weeks before, he moved through the dark water like something that belonged there. Dawn comes. Now he swims without any guide, except the sun and his sense of direction, and the currents are worse during the day. His face, exposed above the surface, begins to burn almost immediately. By mid-morning, his neck and chest are bright red, then deeper red, then blistered. He starts running a fever. The dehydration is getting severe. He can feel it in his head, in his joints, in the way his thoughts start to move slower. He still does not stop. The second night brings the stars back, but it also brings something else. By now, his legs have gone partially numb. The currents have pushed him far off course. The 18 kilometers he originally planned to swim has become something much, much longer. Later, when authorities reconstruct his trajectory, they will estimate that he covered approximately 100 kilometers of actual water, the equivalent of swimming from downtown Miami to West Palm Beach and back in open ocean, with no food, no water, no rest, through shark-infested water, at night, with a fever. 100 kilometers, about 62 miles, in the open Pacific, alone. There are moments during the second night when he loses consciousness. He discovers, through desperate necessity, a technique. Float on his back, let himself drift for a few minutes, surface back to awareness, then swim again. His body is operating on some deeper reserve that he barely understands, and he later describes it in his memoir with words that sound almost mystical. The ocean breathed like a living, dear, and kind being. In other moments, he writes more plainly, "My sunburned face, neck, and chest were very painful. I had a fever and felt more and more sleepy. At times I lost consciousness for long periods." The second day, the island appears. He can see it on the horizon. A dark shape, palm trees, the outline of land. He starts swimming toward it with everything he has left. And the current grabs him. It shoves him sideways, south, parallel to the shoreline, away from the beach he can see. He fights. The current doesn't care. For what feels like hours, Siargao Island is right there, and completely out of reach. But the current that was his enemy becomes, for one brief moment, something else. It carries him south along the island's coast, and then sweeps him inward, toward a reef on the southern shore. He rides a wave over the reef, a terrifying, chaotic, barely controlled scramble across sharp coral in the dark, makes it through into the lagoon, and then swims one final hour through still, shallow water. On the night of December 15th, 1974, Stanislav Kurilov crawls onto a beach on the island of Siargao in the Philippines. He collapses. He can't feel his legs. He can barely think. He is sunburned beyond recognition, feverish, dehydrated, and completely alone on a beach in a country he has never visited, whose language he doesn't speak, thousands of kilometers from the Soviet Union that would already be writing his name into its list of criminals. He has made it. Local fishermen find him the next morning, glowing faintly, because his skin is covered in bioluminescent plankton from the ocean. They think for a moment that they have found something supernatural. In a way, they have. Now here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. The Philippine authorities arrest him immediately, not for anything he's done, but because they don't know what to make of him. A Soviet citizen, alone, appearing from the sea with no boat, no documents, no explanation that makes sense within the framework of normal reality. The Cold War is in full force. Could he be a Soviet spy? Could this whole thing be some kind of operation? They detain him for nearly a year while they investigate. Kurilov spends the time in a Philippine prison, but it's the strangest prison he could have ended up in. The warden, apparently charmed or simply bewildered by this man who swam from the USSR, lets him walk around the city, takes him to bars, invites him to dinner. It is, by any measure, the least Soviet experience Stanislav Kurilov has ever had in his life. After about 6 months of investigation, the Philippine authorities determined that he is exactly what he says he is: a man who jumped off a ship and swam to their country because he wanted to be free. They contact his sister in Canada. She confirms everything. He is released. Back in the Soviet Union, the reaction is swift and total. Kurilov is tried in absentia and sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp for high treason. His younger brother, Valentin, who had nothing to do with any of this, who worked as a deep-sea navigator in Leningrad, is immediately fired from his job. His wife leaves him. He falls into poverty, then into alcoholism. He would not survive to old age. The human cost of one man's freedom was paid, at least in part, by someone who never chose to be part of the story. In Canada, Slava Kurilov starts from zero. He works in a pizzeria. He scrubs dishes. He speaks English with an accent that makes people tilt their heads. Slowly, through relentless effort, he rebuilds the career that the Soviet Union had spent years blocking. He works for Canadian oceanographic companies, then American ones. He does mineral research in the Hawaiian Islands, fieldwork in the Arctic, expeditions in equatorial waters. He goes everywhere he was never allowed to go. In 1986, he moves to Israel. He marries a woman named Lena Gendelev. He joins the faculty at the Haifa Oceanographic Institute, doing the research he had dreamed of since he was a 10-year-old boy, swimming across a Siberian river against his mother's wishes. He publishes his memoir, Alone at Sea, first in an Israeli magazine, then in Russian, then in fragments translated into English. It is a document of extraordinary clarity, written by a man who understood the ocean in a way that very few people ever have. He is happy. In 1990, with the Soviet Union finally collapsing under its own contradictions, the death sentence against Kurilov is overturned. He is allowed to return to Russia legally for the first time in 16 years. He goes to visit his old mother. He sees his family. He walks the streets of a country that had tried to erase him and discovers that it has only partially succeeded. And then, on January 29, 1998, while diving in Lake Kinneret in Israel, Stanislav Kurilov gets his fins entangled in a fishing net at the bottom. He runs out of air. He drowns. The man who defeated the Pacific Ocean, who survived 100 kilometers of open water, alone, with nothing but a snorkel and a pair of fins, who had spent 3 nights in the dark, guided only by stars and willpower, dies doing the one thing he loved more than anything else in the world. He was 61 years old. There's something almost unbearable in that ending, and something almost perfect. Here's what the story of Stanislav Kurilov actually tells us. The Soviet system was not defeated by armies or missiles or political movements in this case. But it was defeated by one man who studied it carefully enough to find the single gap in its armor, a cruise that didn't require a passport, and then prepared himself completely and thoroughly for what came after. Every single piece of his training, from the yoga to the star navigation, to the custom-designed gloves, to the years of diving experience, contributed directly to his survival. This was not a lucky escape. This was an engineered one, the kind that takes years to prepare for and seconds to execute.